And let's start Unit 7. So Unit 7 is the early 20th century. This is 1890 through 1945. So this is from where we left off last time with the progressive movement, all the way leading up to World War II. So this is the progressive era and World War I. So the progressive era, so basically a progressive is a person who wants to reform policy. They want more government intervention in policy to sort of fix the faults of the Gilded Age, what we talked about last time. So these people, the progressives, are different from the populists. So remember from last time, the populists were sort of the poor farmers. They weren't really that popular. But the difference is with the progressives, they have a lot more effect because these are the urban people, the middle class reformers who want to just increase the role of government in reform. They didn't want to have any major shift in sort of capitalism versus socialism or anything like that. They just were these sort of bourgeois people who wanted reform. So those middle class people who wanted this reform. So that's some characteristic thing you should know, how the progressive movement differed from the populist movement. You might get a question like that or something like that. And so because of their demographics, the progressives succeeded much more than the populists. So we'll get into the sort of strides they took, but just know the progressive dominated this era from 1900 to 1920. So muckrackers is a term you'll hear to describe some progressives. Muckrackers were just progressive journalists, those types of people, filmmakers, who uncovered corruption in the corporate scheme. So the most notable muckrackers are Ida Turnbull, who exposed the oil companies, Lincoln Stephan, who exposed corruption of earned management, and Upon Sinclair, who discovered corruption in the meatpacking industry. So all of these increased public opinion to support the progressives. These journalists exposed the issues that were going on, and the public said that's not right, and they started their support to fix it. So just know, muckrackers led to more support for the progressive movement. In this or not in this movement, but in this era as well, the NAACP is formed. So the NAACP, or the National Association for Advancement of Colored People, is founded by W.E.B. Du Bois. So this movement, obviously, as most of you know, is sort of the Black liberation movement that will sort of really succeed with sort of the legal spectrum all the way to Brown v. Ed, and really, it's just like the first really successful Black liberation and Black movement in what we've sort of talked about so far. Like if you remember last time when we talked about not Du Bois, but the other one, Eugene Debs, he wasn't really the most successful, while the NAACP and Du Bois is pretty successful with their movements. Another thing that will start to come up is feminist movements. So feminist and feminism is not sort of the feminism you're thinking of in your head right now, where it's what am I trying to think of? Like a libtard feminist gets owned. That's not sort of the things we're talking about here. This is just more of a female movement into the workplace, out of the homes, out of the cult of domesticity, into the workplace, and into more of a common.
Did he freeze or did we?
He did.
Shit.
Did I freeze? You're
Found Kim.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I'm back.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Yeah, I don't know what the hell is going to happen with the recording, but I don't really care. They're not going to watch it anyway. The last video got...
No, it said it was still in progress.
Okay, good. The last video got 2 views, so I don't think a lot of people are watching these recordings. So sort of where did I leave off? What was the last thing I said?
The NAACP.
Okay, so yeah, I was actually kind of wondering when I said something, no one laughed.
Oh, feminist movements. Feminist movements.
Yeah, I thought I wasn't funny. So the feminist movement is sort of the feminism of moving women into the workplace, out of the homes into the workplace. Voting rights too, especially, will come into play, and sort of both the woman liberation and the sexual liberation of women will also come into play. So an early advocate for feminism is Margaret Sanger. So she was widely hated by the public for her movements with feminism, but really her movements were pretty good. They were very good for women. She promotes the use of contraceptives, so condoms, birth control, and this was sort of illegal in most of the United States. So contraceptives is illegal in most of the United States, and Margaret Sanger sort of promotes the use of the first birth control. This makes her widely unpopular, but in hindsight, she was probably good on her for doing that. One of the greatest successes of the feminist movement is obviously the 19th Amendment. So an easy way to remember what the 19th Amendment is, 1919. Easy way to remember what it was, and it is women's suffrage. So women being able to vote. Yeah, that's the 19th Amendment. So progressive politics. So we get Robert Laflottier or Laflotte or whatever you want to call him. It's French. I don't really care. He was a Wisconsin governor who led the way for a lot of progressive state officials. He implemented a lot of progressive taxations, a lot of regulations to rail, a lot of infrastructural improvements that are sort of the cornerstones of the progressive movement. So he also led sort of ballot initiatives. So these ballot initiatives include referendums, recall elections. Basically, it's more direct action with the voter. So a referendum is sort of, if you remember, equal sexual orientation marriage in 2016, I want to say, maybe. I think it is 2016, where basically people in the state could vote whether if they supported same-sex marriage or not. That is sort of the referendum that you could think of that you guys might actually know. So this is just more direct action with voters. Recall elections are also if a majority of people in a state, I think it's 2/3 majority, if they vote to recall a member of their like constituency of their voting block. So like we can recall Phil Murphy if we really want to. I know there was actually a movement for that. Did not succeed.
Matt,
Yeah,
I'm a little bit confused with the progressive versus the what was the other one? Populist.
populist. So the main difference is populists are the poor farmers who are generally unsuccessful, and the progressives are the urban middle class reformers who are successful because of their demographic, usually.
So it's pretty much making the rich richer, poor poorer.
No. So progressives are like liberals. Like think of it like that. So like instead of these poor people saying like we're poor and we don't like it, which people were like, you're poor, like I don't care. These were sort of the business class people, like merchants, it's like shoemakers, tailor makers, saying like, you know what, some of the stuff that's going on right now isn't right. And so more people listen to them because, oh, these people are more like us. These are middle class people. These are sort of like
Oh, okay.
people.
That makes sense.
But there were also working class progressives. They saw a lot of bills proposed, like limiting the work week, minimum wage, which won't actually happen until FDR in 1940, but we'll get there when we get there. So another form of progressive politics was the adoption, or I actually just mentioned this, the adoption of rights for the labor movement. So we get the minimum wage, progressive income taxes, child labor laws, all which are keystones of the progressive labor movement. So one of the most famous progressives, Theodore Roosevelt, or Teddy Roosevelt, as some of you may know him as, he is our first progressive president in a line of many. So he came after McKinley. So President McKinley before him. McKinley was our first sort of progressive president, I guess you could call it. But Theodore Roosevelt was really the first one. So McKinley is assassinated in 1901, a year after his presidency. and he is succeeded by Teddy Roosevelt. So Roosevelt, when he gets office, he champions the idea of breaking up monopolies. So if you remember the Sherman Antitrust Act, how ineffective it was and how it was used more against labor unions than it was actually used against the monopolies. Theodore Roosevelt now enforces the Sherman Antitrust Act as it was supposed to be enforced. So he breaks up a lot of railway companies in 1902. He negotiates labor contracts between coal workers and the mines, with major labor concessions going hand in hand. So these were major wins for the labor movement, who have been like defiled and put down for so long. He gets the nickname the Trust Buster. So just the amount of trust he broke up. So he broke up, I believe, oil, rail. There are more. The meat packing industry, for one, which he made the FDA after that. He was also a big champion of national parks. So he made a lot of federal land. He bought up a lot of land in sort of the West, and he reserved it for national park use. Another sort of cornerstone of his thing is new nationalism. So when we talk about nationalism prior to this, we're talking about sort of like American sort of patriotism. When we talk about new nationalism, on the other hand, we are talking about like the American dream. Like, you deserve to have sort of a livable wage, a house, all these things, and that is sort of like new nationalism. Yeah. So William Howard Taft comes after Roosevelt. He establishes the national income tax and the direct election of senators. These were progressive policies that get put into place. So prior to the 17th Amendment, senators would be elected by sort of an electoral college sort of thing, not by the direct vote of the people. So we wouldn't vote for our senators. They would get chosen by the governors of those states. But now we get to pick our own senators and vote for them that way. So Taft really doubles down on the trust busting. He breaks up a lot more trust than Roosevelt had. He also establishes his sort of idea of dollar diplomacy. So dollar diplomacy will be sort of the first step in a lot of interventionist policies in Latin America. So dollar diplomacy is basically giving loans to Latin American colonies, or not colonies, sorry, Latin American countries, East Asian countries, China, Indonesia, for example, and for improved relations. So this is the United States sort of expanding its sphere of influence that will lead to its imperialism in the latter half of the decade. So the split of 1912 that occurs is when Teddy Roosevelt runs for election, and they split the vote, and this leads to Woodrow Wilson being elected as president. It's not a really major thing, just the progressive movement split for a time between Theodore Roosevelt and Taft. So Woodrow Wilson, instead of a new nationalism, he establishes his new freedom. So the new freedom is restricting the federal government from interfering in your daily life. So for Roosevelt, there were like sort of good trusts and bad trusts. For Woodrow Wilson, there were only bad trusts. So he sought to have a more government involvement in your life. So the regulation of the foods you'd eat, the regulation of the schools you'd go to, the regulation of like the goods you'd buy. These are a lot of government interventionist policies that come with the progressives. So this is sort of them succeeding, and the more like government outreach programs and more government involvement in the daily lives of people.
So Woodrow Wilson does believe in the fact of restricting the government from doing that, right?
He's more like the government will protect you. That's more of his. So like the government will protect you through regulating things for you. So that is the new freedom he's talking about. Increased government regulation.
But not like telling them what to do, pretty much.
No, he's not telling the people what to do. He's telling the businesses what to do. If you can.
Okay.
So Woodrow Wilson establishes the FTC, or the Federal Trade Commission, and he also champions the Clayton Antitrust Act. So these are just more restrictive things put into place to regulate the sort of monopolies of the time and break up the trusts that existed during this era. He also establishes the Federal Reserve System. So
Again?
What did you say, Moscow? Did I cut out? Did I cut out? Again? I'm back. I don't know what the hell's happening, but it's happening. We're just going to keep moving. So the FTC and the Clayton Antitrust Act is more trust busting from Woodrow Wilson, and it's more of a government involvement in trade and those sort of things like that. The Federal Reserve System as well is more government involvement and control of the economics of the country. So it's just more control of the nation's finances. Another key thing in his administration is the Spanish flu and the first Red Scare. So the Spanish flu is up till this point in history, or no, just in history at all, it is the most deadly pandemic that has ever existed. So if you think of the Black Plague and how many it killed a third of the population of Europe, the Spanish flu killed the same amount of people. I believe the statistics, it killed the same amount of people in a year than the Black Plague had in 5 years.
Jesus.
So the Spanish flu sweeps the entire world and devastates the populations of Spain, America, and English, and basically every country in the world. The Spanish flu is not from Spain. It's from America. Do I know why it's given the name Spanish flu? No. But that's just what it's given. So another thing is the first Red Scare. So the first Red Scare is after the Russian Revolution, in which communists take over the government and Bolsheviks take over the government. There was an increased paranoia in the United States that these communists are going to come to our country and ruin it for us. So a major thing of the first Red Scare is the execution of Italian anarchists that come to the America. So 2 Italian anarchists are put up on Trump charges and are executed by the federal government. So that is the sort of trademark of the first Red Scare. So foreign policy and U.S. entry into World War I. So during the administration of Teddy Roosevelt, he establishes the Platt Amendment. So the Platt Amendment is basically making Cuba a puppet state of the United States. It basically says, Cuba, you will not do anything, you will not interact with any other country, and you won't pass sort of laws in your state without U.S. approval. So if you look, actually we'll get there in a second. So another thing is the building of the Panama Canal. So the building of the Panama Canal splits the travel time from Asia to the United States, from I think Asia to Europe in half. So you know the Panama Canal. I don't really have to explain that, I don't think. So the United States takes advantage of the Panamanian Revolution against Colombia at the time, and sort of ushers in a new era of U.S. imperialism. So the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Moscow, do you remember what the Monroe Doctrine is?
No.
So the Monroe Doctrine says, no European country, no country outside of South America will have colonies in it, will interfere with South American politics. So Roosevelt takes this and makes it a lot more in-depth. So he says that the United States has a right to protect its economic interests in South and Central America by using military force. So it is also referred to as the big stick policy. So if you look at our little propaganda thing over here, if you look at our little cartoon, you can see Teddy Roosevelt taking his navy of debt collection and sort of army of ships to the Caribbean Sea and sort of cashing in the U.S.'s economic interests in it. So basically, this is just U.S. ownership of basically the entire continent of North America and South America as well. And after this, we get U.S. entry into the First World War, or the Great War, or the world to end all wars, which it did not do. So Wilson promises, he says that he runs on the platform of keeping America out of the war. He does not do this, and he involves America in the war after much sort of stubbornness. So he enacts the U.S. policy of neutrality. So he says that the United States will not trade. They said they will trade with all these countries in the war without favor. So they will trade with Germany just as they had traded with Britain. This doesn't work, and it's not really the most true thing, as the U.S. traded a lot more with Britain than it traded with Germany or traded with Austria-Hungary. So this is the favoritism for the Allies that will set up U.S. entry. So the English blockade the German state, the German Empire, and U.S. trade is sort of kind of getting rid of in Germany. So there's not a lot of U.S. backlash from this, mainly because the UK paid for the goods on the merchant ships that went to Germany and then just seized them. But it will create a problem for the United States with the Lusitania. So Germany, to sort of break out of this blockade, used U-boats. So they used submarines to get out of this blockade, and these U-boats would sink civilian ships sometimes that were carrying armaments. So the Lusitania, a civilian ship, was sank by a German U-boat, killing 1,200 people, 128 of which being Americans. So this fueled public outrage.
No.
What the hell is it? Is this better?
Yep.
Yeah,
Right.
you're good.
I'm on my hotspot, so I'm not dealing with my Wi-Fi anymore. What was the last thing I said?
You're talking about the sinking of the Lusitania ships.
Yeah, so the Lusitania will it's significant because it sparks public outrage against Germany. So public opinion was kind of divided. A lot of people, especially in Pennsylvania, were Germans. So in the start of the war, we were kind of like, yay Germany, yay Britain. But no, after the Lusitania, public opinion is mainly on the side of the Allies. So overwhelmingly, it's basically on the side of the Allies. So Wilson, even with his neutrality promises, starts war preparedness. So there's an increased manufacturing of armaments. So ships is the main one actually. Ships, U.S. weapons, cavalry divisions as well. And it sort of gets the U.S. economy into shape where it needs to be for war. So the Zimmerman telegram is what will get United States into the war. So Germany sends a little message to Mexico where they say, hey, best friend Mexico, if you totally invade U.S. and get back your territories that you lost in 1835, we will totally help you and you'll be our best friend forever. And Britain intercepts this telegram. And what they do, it's basically like, I don't want to say propaganda, but they really over-exaggerate it a lot. So they don't bring it to the U.S. They don't show the U.S. what's going on. What they do is they publish it in the newspapers. So they publish it in like the Punch, for example. They publish it in a lot of like the New York Times publishes it as well. I think the article is actually very interesting on it. And this is just public opinion. Just let's go to war now. This is completely terrible. And Wilson sort of gives in. So Congress declares war on the United States in, I think, 1916, I believe. So World War One and its aftermath. So the United States makes the War Industry Board. So this guarantees supply for both the United States and all of the allies. So this is just increasing production, increasing manufacturing of supply goods for the war. The United States also passes the Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918, basically making it illegal to be against the war. So a lot of people were put in prison. A lot of people, some actually were actually executed for opposing the war. This is also the creation of the Select Service Act of 1917. It is a military draft that drafted a lot of young men, as you can see in our little photo here, a lot of men to the war. So another thing that goes hand in hand with the war is the creation of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So in response to increased paranoia of the Russian Revolution, J. Edgar Hoover spearheads the FBI. So the FBI was created to investigate like sedition and espionage in the country. So the FBI's main sort of significance in this period is the Palmer raids. So Attorney General Palmer campaigns to arrest and deport radical leftists. So after Palmer's sort of building is blown up by a bomb, he blames it on the communists and says that he is going to arrest and deport all the radical leftists in the country. Let me get this out of my screen. So the Committee on Public Information is also formed. This is just a propaganda machine. So it portrays the Germans as baby-killing, cold-blooded, power-hungry Huns. I wish I had a photo. I probably should have included one. But this is just even more public opinion on support of war and on support of the Allies. So there's also an uptick in the rejection of German culture. So a lot of the proud Germans before in Pennsylvania kind of go into like a little hiding a little bit. And one of the funny things is they renamed sauerkraut to Liberty Cabbage during the war, just because people hated Germany that much.
Now,
yeah.
Just to clarify, we were on the Allies side, and so was Germany, correct? Or was Germany on the Axis?
So the two factions of this war are the Allies, which include the Russian Empire, which will be pulled out. It's not important. The Russian Empire, France, Britain, Belgium. Well, actually, Belgium stays out. Yeah. So just know Britain, France, and the U.S. are the allies with Russia. This is called the Entente. It's not really like you just call it the Allies. It's fine. So the Axis are into World War II. So we refer to this faction as the Great Powers, the Central Powers. So the Central Powers are Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottomans.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So Germany, like when in doubt, Germany is at war with the U.S. Germany and the U.S. aren't on the same side until after the Second World War.
Got it.
So the aftermath of World War One. So World War One saw a lot of woman upheaval into the workforce. So at one point during the war, 20% of factory floor jobs were held by women. A lot of the soldiers and a lot of the factory workers went off to fight in the war, so women replaced their jobs. So this is where we also see the start of the movement of female liberation to the workplace. But it was short-lived because as veterans returned from the war, they took the jobs back from these women. And also, key point is the Great Migration. So the Great Migration is the movement of 500,000 Black people leaving the South in search of northern manufacturing jobs. So the northern factorization and industrialization leads to 500,000 Black people leaving their lives on farms, leaving the crop line system, leaving sharecropping to sort of in quest for a northern factory job. A lot of these people are successful in finding jobs, and this is the Great Migration. So Du Bois, if you remember, the leader of the NAACP, he encouraged black people to enlist in the military, and a lot of them do so. So we see segregation in the army as well. So segregation will start to be called into question in this time. At the end of the war, uh, the Allies won. That's all you need to know. It's not a Euro exam, so we don't really need to know what happened. At the end of the war, America sort of puts forward the 14 Points Treaty. Woodrow Wilson puts this forward. He says that a lasting peace can only be achieved through self-determination, freedom of the seas, free trade, end to secret agreements, the reductions of arms, and a League of Nations. So self-determination is basically the end of colonialism, and a League of Nations is what is created after the war. So this is an example of the separation of powers and the system of checks and balances, because the president is able to negotiate foreign treaties, but these treaties have to be ratified by the Senate. So the United States will never join the League of Nations because the Senate says that they don't want to. So Woodrow Wilson's plan of the League of Nations is joined by a lot of European countries, but the U.S., who made the League of Nations, never joins it. So the U.S. is not a signatory of the Treaty of Versailles, which ended the war, nor ever a member of the League of Nations.
And that's because of the checks and balances, correct?
Yeah, that's because the Senate didn't want to.
Okay.
So Henry Cabot Lodge leads this sort of movement away from the League of Nations. They don't want to join. So this is the Roaring '20s we're at now. So this is the age of jazz and the Great Depression. So a lot of pro-business Republican administrators followed the progressives. So a lot of Americans during this time were becoming comfortable with the idea of big businesses. So just as we're comfortable with the idea of Ford, Kmart, Walmart, like these Chipotle, like these are very, very big businesses that control large sectors of their market, but we're completely fine with them. So this is where we see a shift from trust busting to comfortability with big businesses. So the FTC, or Federal Trade Commission, helps these businesses more than they regulate them. So the commission that's supposed to regulate businesses aids them more than it regulates them. The Supreme Court of the United States as well overturns the minimum wage for women and nullifies the labor restrictions on children that we sort of went over in the prior slides. So we see the SCOTUS pro-business thing rise to fame again. The federal government also suppresses a lot of the labor movements through force. So the army is called to deal with, the National Guard is called to deal with a lot of the labor riots, a lot of the labor strikes at the time, and the federal government sides with the businesses more than the unions. So this is a shift from Teddy Roosevelt's support for the unions to the Republicans' sort of pro-business side and anti-union sort of side. So the Teapot Dome scandal is sort of the trademark of this, the cornerstone of this. It is basically the U.S. government lending out public land for private drilling of private companies. So public land is supposed to be reserved for the public, and the U.S. is caught leasing it out to private businesses for money. So the presidents of this time, Warren Harding, Calvin Coolidge, and Herbert Hoover, are these pro-business Republicans. So we also see the rise of welfare capitalism, as it's called. So in exchange for not striking, in exchange for not forming a union, businesses provide benefits for their workers. These may include healthcare, dental, those sort of things. Will be sort of companies saying, if we give you these things, you won't form a union. Modern culture also starts to emerge from the Roaring '20s. So we get inventions such as the automobile, the radio, and the formations of suburbs as we know it. So suburbs, as you remember, were really created based on mass transportation. So the increased ability of mass transportation with subways, trains, automobiles will lead to the middle class flock out of the poor cities into the rich suburbs. Another thing that takes a hold is the advertising industry. So a lot of the cigarette ads, a lot of the Coca-Cola ads, and sort of advertising as we know it today takes a hold during this century. Another thing is pink collared jobs. John Kim, if you had to take a stab at what pink collared jobs mean, what would you think that means? So if you know that blue collar jobs are like poor construction jobs, white collar jobs or more of the rich businessmen, what do you think pink collar jobs could be?
Middle.
No. Come on, Moscow.
Female.
Female.
Yeah.
So the movement of pink collar jobs, as they're dubbed, or female workplace movements, become where women become a lot of school teachers. They become nurses a lot of the times, librarians. So these sort of stereotypical female jobs or pink collar jobs really start to emerge during the period. There is also a movement of the flapper and sort of the roaring 20s as its name. So if you look on the side on my pictures, those five women there are flappers. So flappers are basically like a sexually liberated movement of women. So basically, before this era, women had to have corsets. They had to be like, I mean, you know the sort of things like no dresses higher than the ankles. You had to be covered, shoulders covered, and the flappers represent the sexual liberation of women in the time. So women were doing things such as smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol that would be never seen as a woman besides now, like 10 years ago, like you never see a woman drinking alcohol or smoking a cigarette 10 years ago, but now in the roaring 20s, women are openly doing this. So that is the sexual liberation is kind of directly correlated to the feminism movement. The lost generation, as it's named. So the lost generation is basically a lot of writers at the time sort of describing like their hatred of consumerism and the alienation from America. So if you remember, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Moscow, what book did he write?
F. Jack or F what?
F. Scott Fitzgerald, what book did he write?
Let's see.
Or if any, no, don't look it up. Or if anyone knows,
To Kill a Mockingbird.
Great Gatsby.
it's The Great Gatsby.
Damn it.
So F. Scott Fitzgerald writes The Great Gatsby. Remember the green light at the end of the sort of thing. So that is the lost generation. We also got Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea, and that just describes the writers feeling an alienation from the culture. We also get the Harlem Renaissance and jazz. So if anyone knows who Langston Hughes is, Raisin in the Sun. If anyone knows that. So Langston Hughes is sort of one of the most prominent figures of the Harlem Renaissance. So it's basically the movement of Black people into sort of a progressive culture, into jazz. Louis Armstrong, as I'm sure you guys know, is a member of the Harlem Renaissance as well and becomes the sort of figurehead of jazz music. So the age of jazz and the Great Depression. So obviously, all this cultural movements didn't come without its backlash. So the main arbiter of backlash is the Ku Klux Klan, or the KKK. They reached their peak membership during the 1920s. So they had over 5 million members. So the Ku Klux Klan, as I'm sure you're aware, is the hatred of Jews, Black people, homosexuals, keeping women in the kitchen, those sort of things, urbanites, anyone who wasn't Christian. All these sorts of things are the hated people of the Ku Klux Klan. So Ku Klux Klan is very popular at this time, really. A lot of people do find some things in common with the Klan. And if you see from the photograph on the side there, this is the Ku Klux Klan March on Washington. Not the one in 1965 with MLK. This is the March on Washington of the Klan. So the Klan is able to walk the streets of Pennsylvania Avenue, expressing their beliefs of white supremacy and their cultural rejection of what America has become, basically making it back to what it had been prior. So Sanko and Vanzetti is the 2 Italian immigrants who are executed under the Sedition Acts. They're convicted on propped up charges of killing a security guard, which they did not do. And they are killed because basically it boils down to they are Italian anarchists and communists. So after their sort of execution, the government passes the Emergency Quota Act of 1924. So basically this act says it's a discrimination against new immigrants. So what was a new immigrant?
Poor. They're unlike the old immigrants who were
Oh,
who were rich, but the new immigrants were like the Irish, the Greeks, right? The
yeah. So the new immigrants are the poor Eastern European and Southern European people, and basically the government says we're only accepting 5,000 Italian settlers and immigrants this year. So this is basically just discrimination against new immigrants. Another thing is the Scopes monkey trial. Moscow, I know you know what the
Ah,
monkey trial is.
ah.
Inherit the Wind. Evolutionists. John
Oh.
Scopes.
I know.
John Kim knows. So this sort of is another cultural movement of William Jennings Bryan against the Darwinist movement of evolution. So that's just a little tidbit. Prohibition also gets put into place. So it's really spearheaded by feminist movements that alcohol is banned under. So it is the 18th Amendment. It's passed, I think it's a month before the 19th Amendment. So it just bans the sale, the use, the drinking of alcohol in the country because the woman movement at the time thought it correlated to their husbands being bad people. It correlated to like gross economic productivity things, and it is eventually repealed. Not until I think 34, I want to say, but also ushers in the gangster era. So Al Capone, those people are the gangsters of the time, Chicago especially. Yeah, gangsters who basically just sell and make their money based on selling alcohol. There was one prohibition like agent of the government who said he could find alcohol within 30 minutes in any city. He found it within 27 in New York, 21 in Atlanta, and in New Orleans, he finds it within 21 seconds after he asks his taxi driver, where can I find alcohol? And the taxi driver hands him a bottle of vodka. So basically, prohibition is kind of utterly ignored by the people, except like very few sects. People really don't follow prohibition. It's repealed shortly after. So now we're at the Great Depression. So we get to Herbert Hoover. So Herbert Hoover is a Republican, and he sort of ushers in our era of Great Depression. So Great Depression is caused by the overproduction from the war. If you remember the supply thing that we had before, where we were producing so much goods to supply all of our allies, this oversupply and overproduction leads to economic collapse. So supply heavily outweighed demand, leading to goods costing way less, leading to people getting paid less, and then leading to economic collapse.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Did the Great Depression only happen in America?
No. So the Great Depression is a worldwide thing. Black Monday, as it's called in Britain, and I think it's also called Black Monday in France. It's just their overproduction from So basically, America is not really harmed economically from the war. Like we're kind of on our own continent, so we don't really face the devastations of the war, but we feel the devastation from our overproduction. Britain, France, and Germany, on the other hand, feels the devastation from their own places. So a lot of the industry in France, England, Germany are bombed. So a lot of factories are destroyed. A lot of railroads, infrastructure is completely destroyed based on the war. Like Belgium is like called the shell-shocked spectators because they watch as like the Netherlands and France get utterly decimated by bombardments from Germany. So, I mean, their economic collapse is due to that fact and also the overproduction from the United States. But really, our economic collapse is from our overproduction.
So,
So
we just overproduced and what? Like had extra stuff for no reason?
yeah, so like so you know how like when we want to sell things, we make it at a price in which people will buy,
Yeah.
right? And do you know what like undercutting sale is?
No, but
So like okay. So like if I like okay, just trying to think of something. If I have two Arizona iced teas and they're two different companies, if I produce a lot of these and I just really, really want to sell them, I'm gonna lower the price, right? So if I
yeah.
have 5 Arizonas and I say, hey, they cost 99 cents per Arizona, but I'll give you all of them for $3. So now all those Arizonas I have are really worth like 60 cents or so.
Yeah.
So that decreases their value on the marketplace and decreases the money that I'm getting from it. So basically, that makes people sort of buy things at very, very low prices. So they start getting paid less. They start because a company needs to stay afloat, right? If I'm selling my things for less, I need to cut my costs. So I'm going to start laying people off. I'm going to start lowering my paychecks, you know?
Yeah.
So that leads to the economic collapse. Basically, we're sort of keeping the whole world economy alive until we fall into the Great Depression, which causes a lot of economic fallout in Europe as well. Did I explain everyone's questions?
I think so.
Did the overproduction ever bleed into World War II? Like, did that help at all?
So World War II, like armaments, aren't really used in the Second World War just because we committed ourselves after the war to disarmament. So we committed ourselves to getting rid of arms factories, destroying like guns, destroying artillery. The only really toll it plays in is when we start leasing armaments to Britain and leasing armaments to France, and also destroyers for naval bases. Basically, we give a bunch of our old World War One destroyers to Britain in exchange for naval bases in the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. But we don't use them in the war. We just kind of give them for cheap to our allies in the UK and in France.
Okay, cool.
So Hoovervilles, as you see from my little poster, is the not government housing, the sort of shanty towns of the homeless. So a lot of people were unemployed, thus they lost their homes, they lost their forms of work, so they had to live in Hoovervilles. So they were named Hoovervilles after the president, whom a lot of people blamed for the Great Depression. So the Dust Bowl is another sort of geological event that occurs during the Great Depression, not really caused by it in any way, but it really just does deepen the depression. So if anyone's familiar, there was a great drought in the middle what do you call that? The middle Midwest for a while, and this led to like crazy and like agricultural, like terrible economic things. So farmers couldn't grow anything because their fields were dry. They didn't get any rain. And then another thing that happened is a lot of tornadoes picked up because of the dryness, and we get sort of those like dust balls sort of things, like large movements of cloud of dust moving around the Midwest. That's why it's called the Dust Bowl. So our last sort of thing before World War II is the Federal Works Project. So before like we get into the really, really bad parts, or sort of to mend the Great Depression, Herbert Hoover establishes the Federal Works Project. So this is the Hoover Dam, for example. So it's basically creating jobs through federal programs. So through infrastructure improvements, through building of energy sector things. There's the Hoover Dam, Grand Kula Dam. All these are just to create jobs to sort of mend the unemployment. It's not very successful. But Hoover also establishes the Harley-Smoot tariff. If you know one tariff, I'd say know this one, because it really just deepens depression and is the highest protective tariff in U.S. history. So like normal tariffs are like 10 to 15% usually, like 5%. Um, the Harvard Smoot tariff was 60%. So goods from other countries would be taxed at 60% of what they were worth. And it was supposed to boost American manufacturing, but it did not work at all. So it also establishes the Federal Emergency Relief Agency. So this was just bailing out of big businesses to sort of help the U.S. economy. The idea was if the government gave these big businesses money, they could eventually pay it back down the road. They could pay back these loans, and they could also give people jobs. So another sort of low of Hoover's presidency is the bonus expeditionary force. So these are just veterans of the First World War who want their bonuses, who want their money from the government because they're poor now because of the Depression. And Hoover says, okay, I'll try to pass a bill for you guys. The bill fails in the Senate and it is not passed by Congress. So these veterans say, I'm not leaving until you give me my money. And Hoover says, get out. And he brings in the military. So these are literally military people fighting military people. Douglas MacArthur, who will become infamous for his use of the atomic bomb in Japan, will be sort of the leader of the army during this like rebellion, I guess you could call it. So he kicks all of these veterans out. It's a terrible public image for the Hoover administration. Douglas MacArthur is way more brutal. He's way more sort of like his brutality is way higher than it needs to be. It's just excessive force. He kills 2 veterans and thousands are injured. So all this unpopularity allows for the rise of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR as he'll be called. His policy is sort of the opposite of Hoover, and it's a lot more interventionist. So it's a lot more government involvement. So,
Sorry, Nappy.
Yeah.
So Douglas MacArthur was he was a guy. He was like a veteran, right?
No, he was a commander of the U.S. military who led the military force against the veterans.
Okay, and then the Federal Works Project, the Hoover Dam. Can you just explain that again quickly?
Yeah, so it's just federal projects to create jobs.
Okay.
So like building of the Hoover Dam just to create jobs, create energy for the West, those sort of things.
Thank you.
So the New Deal and the Second World War. So there are 2 New Deals. There was one within the first 100 days of FDR's presidency, and then there's one in the second 100 days. So first 100 days is just a sort of like name for what a president plans to do once he's in office. So this will become a sort of buzzword. Like a lot of people will say, like, what were Reagan's goals for his first 100 days? So basically, it's just laying out the president's plan for like growth, economic growth, those sort of things that will lead into what's the word I'm trying to think of? Like economic stimulus, really. So FDR's first New Deal, he establishes a lot of alphabet agencies, what they'll be called. We'll get to those, but like if you look down the slide, we get the AAA, the NRIA, the PWA, the CCC, the TVA. Like these are called alphabet agencies. So FDR first establishes the Emergency Banking Relief Act to restore public's confidence in the banks. So if you look at the photo, FDR does what are called fireside chats. So the use of the radio in the public homes allowed the president to communicate directly to his people. So FDR would talk to the people every Sunday night, saying like, "Hey guys, trust me, we're doing a lot better now. You can trust the banks. Like, I promise, you'll be all right." And so, since FDR was very, very popular, the public's faith in banks were restored. So the Banking Act of 1933 as well it establishes the FDIC, which basically just says that any of the money that you put into the banks, like the government will insure that money. So if I put $1,000 into Bank of America, but Bank of America goes bankrupt, the government says, "Don't worry, we will give you those $1,000 that you would have lost without the FDIC." So prior to this, a lot of like an economic collapse was because people put money into banks, and the banks went bankrupt, and they wouldn't get their money back. So a lot of people, when the Great Depression was happening, pulled their money out of the banks, only leading to more economic turmoil. Thus, restoring trust in the banks was a very pivotal move to sort of put us on the track to economic recovery. FDR also passes the AAA Act, or the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which solves sort of the problem of overproduction. So he cuts production in the Midwest and Western farmers by half. So a lot of the farmers were getting poorer and poorer because they were overproducing and decreasing the price on the market. So he says, if you just decrease your production by half, you'll get money. You'll get more money. He also establishes the Farmer Credit Act from this, which basically allows the government to sort of allocate land to farmers, and it's subsidizing farmer and agricultural programs such like that. So the New Deal also establishes the National Industry Recovery Act, or the NRIA. This limits overproduction further. This is more dealing with production in factories more than it is dealing with production on farms. It also establishes the PWA, or the Public Works Administration. So the Public Works Administration is $3 billion set aside to create jobs building roads, bridges, sewers, public housing. So basically your local DPW. So Department of Public Works is basically the Public Works Administration. He also creates the Civilian Conservation Corps, basically just limiting sort of consumption. And it's just like, you don't really need to know every single one of these. Just know that this is more government intervention in people's daily lives. So it's just more government control in the lives of an everyday person. So the TVA was a daring move by the government, and it also expanded the energy to much of the region. So the government takes over the Tennessee Valley energy sector, basically infringing on the state's rights if they were not successful, but they were successful. So it gave a lot of energy to the region, and it also gave a lot of economic success to the region and a lot of support for the president. So the second New Deal is the second 100 days of office of his. So this is mainly seen as a lot less successful than his first 100 days. So FDR tries to pack the court. So a lot of the Supreme Court decisions are not in favor with FDR. They're kind of adversarial with him. So FDR tries to pack the court. He tries to increase the court from 9 justices to 15, and then put 7 of his justices on it. This is unsuccessful. Congress does not stand for it, and it doesn't work for FDR. FDR also creates the Works Projects Administration, which creates 8 million jobs for the people of America. It also establishes the NLRB, or the National Labor Regulation Board. Basically, this is just a great move for the unions. So it democratizes the unions, and it punishes businesses with anti-union policies. So basically, like, you have to have certain labor laws. Like, businesses can't do certain things with unions, so they can't union bust. So the NLRB sues the union busting businesses, and it is a big step for the unions. So one example today is like Amazon. Amazon's being sued by the NLRD for unfair labor practices with its own unions. The second New Deal also creates the Social Security Administration. So this is Social Security, retirement funds. After you work 40 years, like, you are entitled to a livable retirement. You're entitled to retire at the age of 65. those sort of things. So the New Deal coalition, what is called the voting bloc, who were mainly supporters of the New Deal and people who benefited from it, they sweep FDR right into office. So FDR is put into office with overwhelming support, almost as much as Reagan had in his election of 1984, which we will get to eventually. But FDR's second term is not so much popular as his first. So he proposes the Judicial Reorganization Bill. This is a veiled attempt at court packing. Basically, the bill would have replaced justices over 17 years of age, forcing them to retire and allowing FDR to pick their replacements. So again, very, very unpopular within Congress and unpopular within the people. The United States also goes into recession during his second term. There's just more economic instability in the Americas. He also passes the Fair Labor Standards Act, which establishes finally a minimum wage and a 40-hour work week for people. So that's obviously the Fair Labor Standards Act is a good thing. So foreign policy that leads us to the Second World War. So in 1921, we get the Washington Conference. So the Washington Conference is a meeting of the 7 largest sort of global powers of the time: Japan, Britain, France, Russia, Germany, the U.S., of course. And they're just reinforcing their open door policy with China. So, Moscow, what was the open door policy?
The open door policy. Well, it was the meeting with all 7 of them.
You don't remember the last unit?
The open door.
It's just established
Is that the Philippine thing?
China, but close. So
Yeah.
they're saying that any country has the right to trade with China and opening up China to trade. So they just doubled down on this in the Washington Conference. The Kellogg-Briand Pact is also brought up at the conference, basically saying that the right way of foreign policy is not war. So we must do other things for our foreign policy that are not war. So the good neighbor policy of 1934 is also passed. Well, not passed really, as it is just policy. So this is just establishing military bases and economic coercion in South America. So it's just imperialism, as we talked about last time, given a different name. We also see the rise of protectionism, keeping a high tariffs to protect U.S. manufacturing and U.S. production. And economics is sort of seen as leverage as a means of foreign policy. So, like in order to get China to like us more, I'm going to build 5 factories in China. So this is sort of the foreign policy initiatives that become the cornerstone of America's foreign policy in the leading up to the Second World War. So the Reciprocal Trade Agreement Act is also passed. This is just giving the president more power. It says that the president is allowed to reduce tariffs if he feels that it would benefit foreign policy. So if I think that Britain would like me more if I lowered the taxes, I'm allowed to lower their tariffs. This also establishes the principle of most favorable nation trade status. So most favorable nation is like, my best buddy is Britain. I like France so much, so they get lower tariffs than the rest of everyone else. So most favorable nations that have this today is like Britain, France, Germany, I believe as well, Canada. Well, that's NAFTA, but it's still a thing. So the U.S. also passes the Neutrality Acts. So they are saying, like, I see a little quarrel going on in Europe. They're getting a little feisty with each other, and we're going to stay out of it. We're not getting involved in another European war, and we're just wiping our hands of that. So it bans trading arms to countries and loans to belligerents. So just people at war would be belligerents. It's not followed. I mean, we obviously trade with Britain during the Second World War, and we actually joined the war eventually. but they're kind of just put in place like for public appeal, really, just for public support, because the public did not want another world war. They were not into it. So, foreign policy leading to the Second World War. So, FDR is the only president to be elected for a third term. So, with increased sort of wartime things going on, FDR runs for a third term and he's overwhelmingly swept into office again. So, FDR is seen as like the people president as well, because he just always had the support of the people till his eventual death. So we established the cash and carry policy, which is us leaving sort of neutrality. So this is us trading military armaments with the UK. This is us gaining sort of our own military armaments, us building military factories, those sort of things. So basically how the cash and carry system would work is that Britain and the Allies and really any country could buy goods from the US, but they would have to bring their ship to the US and pick it up. So the way that we would get around this is we would literally, what would happen is you actually look up videos of this. It's actually pretty interesting. On the border of US and Canada, we would literally like put a plane or like put a tank on the border of the country. The Canadian troops would walk over. They would push the plane to their country, to Canada. They would drive the tank to Canada, and then they would ship those planes, tanks, ships, or whatever to Britain and to France. So that was sort of our way of getting around the cash and carry policy. It's actually pretty interesting if you're at all interested in that. Another thing that has passed is the Lend-Lease Act. So this is us increasing our sort of armament trade with Britain and France especially. So if you notice, increasingly, we're more on the side of the Allies instead of the side of the fascists. The good thing about the APUSH course, you don't have to know about European conflicts like at all. Like they don't expect you to know anything really. So you're kind of blessed with that. So the Atlantic Charter Conference as well is sort of the Allies establishing their goals of the war. So the Allies' goals of the war is disarmament, self-determination, freedom of the seas, and guarantees of security as goals of the Allies. What does that kind of sound familiar to? If anyone has been.
There's something in World War I remember.
The League of Nations.
Oh.
So the goals of the war with the Allies is also the goals of the League of Nations. So the U.S. is brought into the war on December 7th, 1943. I believe it might be 44. Honestly, it's not really important. It's 41, actually. So they're brought in on 1941, December 7th, when the Japanese kamikaze ships attack Pearl Harbor. This is the day that the U.S. formally Congress declares war on Japan, which then declares war on Germany. The way it works is we never declared war on Germany. We declared war on Japan, and then Germany and Italy declared war on us. So that is the way that sort of plays out. The most American sort of thing is D-Day. So the storming of Normandy Beach with U.S. troops is sort of American involvement in the Second World War. The saying is for the Second World War is the key to success with the Allies was American steel, British tactics, and then Soviet blood. So that is sort of the saying if you want to know why the Allies won the war, because American steel, British sort of ships and planes, and Soviet blood. So rationing. So a lot of the rations have to go enforced in the country. People could only eat certain things, and a lot of the rations were reserved for the soldiers fighting in the war. So the U.S. also passes the Labor Disputes Act of 1943, which states that the U.S. can take over any business it deems necessary for national security. So Hollywood propaganda also plays a big role in the war, with a lot of movies at the time showing America as a triumphant force and American soldiers as heroes and those sort of things. The government also passes the Selective Training and Service Act of 1940. It is the first peacetime draft that is implemented, and it is not repealed until 1973 with the Vietnam War. So, the World War II also brings images of Rosie Riveter. So Rosie Riveter is the "We Can Do It" lady, going like this. It is just a woman movement into factories and sort of replacing the jobs left by men leaving and fighting in the war. So it's millions of jobs taken by women. These jobs are really not taken back after the war. So we see a movement of the labor force moving in the direction of female empowerment and sort of the goals of feminism panning out. So another thing is the internment of Japanese Americans. So a lot of Japanese Americans were put into internment camps, concentration camps, basically, in California, in Oregon, in Washington, and it's basically because there were like millions of Japanese people in California, and the government suspected that all these people could be double agents for the Japanese government. So we locked them up and put them in camps. So Korematsu is a Supreme Court case where he sues the United States, saying like, you violated my rights as an American citizen, citing the 14th Amendment. And the Supreme Court says like the government can basically do whatever it wants in times of war. I can read you the actual thing. No, it's basically in a time of war, the burden on the United States is to secure the people, and they can do that by whatever they deem necessary. So if they think that there's a Japanese threat, they can put all these people, even if they're innocent, in these camps. So the end of the war is the Yalta Conference, which is just the big three meeting up. So it is Joseph Stalin, Winston Churchill, and FDR meeting up with each other and discussing how they're going to sort of divide Europe and bring peace to Europe after the war. So we see the formation of Soviet satellites in Romania, Poland, Czech, Yugoslavia, and the formation of the Iron Curtain after the Yalta Conference. It also leads to the formation of the United Nations, which is supposed to keep lasting peace in Europe. It obviously does not. And Harry S. Truman takes over the presidency after FDR dies in office. Harry Truman authorizes the use of the atomic bomb in Japan, leading to Japanese surrender. So Hiroshima and Nagasaki are atomically bombed by the U.S. government, and the war is over. Yay. So that is Unit 7. I have an SAQ if we'd like to do it. This is really up to you, though.
I don't care. My brain's a little fried for it, to be honest.
So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run to the bathroom for a second. If you want to look at that right now, sort of plan that out, and I'll tell you if you're right or wrong. You should be able to do it. I mean, I went over it for definitely. It's good practice, too. So I'll be right back. Let's say we'll resume at 10 or 8:50. So you have 4 minutes to think about this, and I'll come back, okay?
Yeah.
All right, I am back. Um, did anyone do it?
I thought about it. Yeah.
I did the first two.
Okay, so we can work through this last one together if we want to do the first two. So Lardy, what was your answer to number A or A?
I got the United States was like in World War One. The United States was super against Germany. There was like tons of propaganda and such that like pictured them as horrible people, and that we should join the war because they're the bad guys and we need to stop them. But in the Second World War, they were really defensive about joining a war, which can be seen through like their tariffs and such. And they only joined because they were forced to because Japan bombed Pearl Harbor.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would say definitely for the second one. I mean, obviously it's like protection in a way because um for World War One, it's when the British captured the telegram, and that was like kind of protection of like Mexico and Germany coming to war against us. And then the second one was obviously protection of like what happened after Pearl Harbor. So it's more in retaliation other countries for like trying to like obviously go against us, I
Yeah.
guess.
I think my answer to this, I would definitely use the League of Nations for the first part of it, and then the United Nations in the second part. So the reaction to international events from the United States with the League of Nations is we said that we were going to establish this to prevent any war, and then we didn't join it. So we were sort of an isolationism sort of policy, isolating ourselves from Europe. And then after the Second World War, we established the UN, and we were sort of the arsenal of democracy, and we sort of embraced the role of a European leader. That's the direction I would have gone with that.
Got it.
So, and then on the flip side, briefly describe one similarity between the two.
I wrote this one. I wrote that they were both like kind of like favored on the terms of Britain and France. Like they were always on their like good terms of trade. Is that like a similarity or?
Yeah, you could definitely do that. So, yeah, those sort of. You can also pull like the neutrality acts. So in both wars, we passed the neutrality acts, and then like betrayed them. So that would have been the one that I used, because it does say one specific historical similarity. So when I see specific historical similarity, I like to name events. So
Got it.
like if I just say like British alliance between the two, like okay, like that's thematically true, but maybe I should mention like Lend-Lease Act. I should mention cash and carry system. So the last one briefly described one specific historical reason for the difference between the United States reaction to So what was the reason for our difference between the First World War and the Second World War?
Well, the Second World War was the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and the First World War was the Zimmerman telegram. So would that be a difference?
Well, it's more. I think it might be the way I'm reading it, but I think this is the reaction to the events following the war.
Oh,
Oh,
I
following.
would say, I mean, after the First World War,
Oh,
like
okay.
came the Great
Results.
Depression, and I mean, I don't really think that happened after the Second World War, right?
Yeah, you could use sort of economic reasons.
Because you could say like after World War II, I guess this isn't as economic, but like I'm sure there's a lot of triumph afterwards. Because like the reason why we went in is because of the Pearl Harbor, right? And the reason why we finished the war was because of the nuclear bombing. So I
Yeah,
feel like there's also like a sense of nationalism as well at the end of World War II.
yeah, you could do that. But again, if you remember, it says like this isn't like me being nitpicky or anything. It does say one specific
Okay.
reason. So I think the one I would use for this is I would say like the United States reaction following like the First World War is we really abstained from the policies because we wanted to see ourselves as not part of US or European issues. So I would pull on isolationism for the first World War for that historical reason. And then I would say after the Second World War, the reason that we created such this powerful role for us is because of worrying tensions with the Soviet Union. So the start of the Cold War, I would say too. Like I know we didn't really necessarily talk about after the Second World War yet. This is my fault. I did look this up at 7:27 before we were supposed to start, but those would be my answers to all three of those.
All right.
So that is Unit 7.
Very good job, and I appreciate you for doing this with Cam.
So
Yeah, man. Thanks, dude.
So
Appreciate it.
we will
Thank you.
we will do
Thank
Unit
you.
8, 9 on Wednesday, and then I will proctor a practice exam on Thursday if anyone's interested in that.
Hold on a second, Nappy.
What?
Are you doing this based off our schedule?
Yes,
Um,
we are off Thursday and Wednesday.
yeah, no, but Wednesday we have a game.
Yeah, at 7.
Oh, okay.
Wait, did you say Unit 9 was on Wednesday or Unit 8?
Both.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I have those review questions if you'd like.
No,
No, no like.
I'm done for the night.
Would you like one?
Oh my god.
Yeah.
You want
I
to do
want-
Why not?
let's do one. So these are just multiple choice questions. Some of these are just like, oh, all the following, so keyword all, can be seen as clashes between traditional and modern culture during the post-World War I era, except. So I'm thinking which one of these does not represent a clash between traditionalist and sort of progressive movements of culture? Is it A, the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, B, the Teapot Dome scandal, C, the Scopes monkey trial, or D, the Emergency Quota Act of 1924?
That one.
B.
So who agrees with Moscow and who agrees with John Kim?
I
So-
think it's wait, can you say B and C again?
So B is the Teapot Dome scandal, C, the Scopes monkey trial, and then D, the Emergency Quota Act of 1924.
So
I
are
think
we
it's the
finding?
teapot one.
I actually agree with you because that was about land, right?
Yeah, so the correct answer is the Teapot Dome scandal. That does
Okay.
not
Oh,
represent a clash between traditionalists and progressives, while the Emergency Quota Act was sort of the discrimination against new immigration because of the culture like that. So that is Unit 7. So enjoy your nights, everyone.
You
Thank
too.
you.
I'm going to enjoy.
Good luck on it.
Hey, good luck, dude.
I've given up. But
Yo, Lordy, stay on here for a second.
All right.
Do you have